Hi, and welcome to Ones and Tooze, FB's economics podcast. Every week we take a couple data points, use them to try to explain the world. I'm Cameron Abadi, FB's deputy editor, with you in Berlin, Germany. As always, Adam Tooze, FB's economics columnist and Columbia University professor, is with us in New York. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Cam.
So we have one data point for you all today, and that is $417.9 billion. That is the estimated net worth of Elon Musk, which makes him, by those same estimates, the richest man in the world. It's a fortune that Musk has amassed through serial entrepreneurship, inventing products ranging from the electric cars of Tesla to the reusable rockets of SpaceX and the satellite internet system of Starlink and the payment system PayPal dating back decades ago. Of course, it's not just that Musk is powerful by virtue of his wealth. It's also now that he has entered the U.S. government by virtue of his close relationship with the current U.S. President, Donald Trump. Musk is now leading an effort called the Department of Government Efficiency that's granted him an office in the White House itself.
And the ball is now in Congress's court as President Trump officially creates Doge. That's that new Department of Government Efficiency. The Elon Musk-led group being tasked to cut as much as $2 trillion in federal tax.
Billionaire and close Trump ally Elon Musk will officially head the effort solo.
Take over, Elon, just take over.
Vivek Ramaswamy, who had been set to co-lead Doge with Musk, bowing out to consider a run for the governor of Ohio.
Elon Musk, the billionaire buddy of President Donald Trump, is witnessing a decline in his popularity in the United States. In fact, a recent poll reveals that tech mogul's popularity took a nosedive after assuming charge of the Department of Government Efficiency. Half of the population doesn't want Musk to advise President Trump on federal
So, a figure that definitely worth discussing at this moment. And to start off with, Adam, I wanted to talk about what Musk's worldview is, if we could at least try to broach what that is. I mean, I've read various interviews he gave, and he often places physics at the very center of his worldview. He talks about searching for natural first principles, that being a motivation for his actions in business, and in some ways of life more generally. And I can see the link between, innovation and that kind of thinking, that kind of search for first principles, how that would kind of clear the decks and lead to kind of new ways of thinking about inventions. But I'm curious what light that sheds on the link between entrepreneurialism, that kind of innovation, and politics and ethics. Can physics inspire anything that we would properly call political action or ethical action, or does this kind of actually reveal that, this kind of first principled curiosity is kind of inherently narcissistic, that innovation may be kind of narcissistic in some way?
Yeah, this thing about first principles is a bit of a mantra in Musk world. And it definitely has got something to do with this almost, one's tempted to say, almost sort of childlike approach. I guess goes to your point, Cam, about sort of narcissism. Like this, this idea that you basically are going to break down any problem, be it, automobiles or rockets, like big technological problems, and you're going to start from scratch. That's the first element. And you're then going to derive whatever solution you come up with from very fundamental principles. And nothing anyone else has done up to that point, no inherited tradition, should be your reference point. In fact, the underlying premise is clearly that all of that is bad, old, dusty baggage that we're better off doing without, moving on from. And this does seem to be an absolutely kind of fundamental MO in Musk world, and it's what the boss likes, and this is how he likes to think. I mean, he has a degree in physics and economics from Penn. There's a somewhat checkered educational background, but that's certainly one place where it's ended up, and so he's clearly deeply fascinated by physics. There is, I think, in his increasingly self-indulgent environment, a tendency to do what the boss likes. In principle, it's of course true that you can derive politics, indeed ethics, from analogies to physics. I mean, they don't like analogic thinking in general, because that's where you end up. That's the bad place you end up if you simply transpose existing solutions to new problems. You don't think of them fundamentally from the ground up. But nevertheless, I mean, that has been the role of physics in the past. If you think about the impact of Newton on early modern political thought, if you think of like cybernetics in the current moment, notions of equilibrium in economics, the stability of equilibria, the uniqueness of equilibria, all of these are ideas that are derived from physics analogues, mechanics more often than not. And certainly you can derive more or less loosely, a politics from this. And this is even more stark when you think about engineering, which after all is a close cousin of physics, with, Lenin defining socialism as Soviets plus, or maybe it's even communism as Soviets plus electrification, right? And then the technocracy movement, which at least one member of Musk's family actually was quite closely associated with. I think it's his maternal grandfather, isn't it? The guy that comes from Canada to South Africa. So there is an old tradition of engineering, physics-driven visions of technocratic government. I think the standard knock on them would be, well, yes, you can derive an ideology from that, but is it really a politics? I mean, if politics is about agonism, if politics is about argument, disagreement, the play of forces, does deriving your own politics from what you claim to be at the appropriate physical analog, does that really allow for the essence of politics, which would be debate and open-endedness? And I mean, this is perhaps a liberal conception of what politics is, but I think really any serious notion of the difference between, say, politics and other types of area of human activity would involve some element of undecidedness. And that's, I think, probably where most people's skepticism would come in, which is that physics and engineering are good for very many things, but that's precisely not where you would think they would be useful. And so I think there's a real ambiguity here. And I think in a sense, there's an ambiguity about whether Musk is really, in a fundamental sense, a political actor at all, really, or actually something else.
Well, then, yeah, let's take a look at how this applies in the case of the Trump administration. I mean, what exactly, as far as we can tell, is Musk up to in the Trump administration? I mean, if he's applying his business principles of disruption, broadly speaking, to the government, what would that mean? And I guess in a more narrow sense, how does this relationship flow in the other direction? I mean, how could Musk be personally benefiting from access to, say, privileged government data? I mean, what's going on there?
Well, I mean, Musk has found a role. He's a man of action. He has to have a role. He can't just be the best buddy of Trump. And so he's doing this Doge thing. Then you can see how that would work, right? If you treat government as the ultimate fuddy-duddy encrusted status quo institution, which is how libertarians like to think about it, then obviously shaking it up and disrupting it is the way that you should be going. But I mean, I think that accompanies Musk's strategy. It isn't the core of it. I mean, the core of the strategy is presumably you have to express a preference within the American political system, or the political system opens you up to that possibility. Trump comes along, who of all American politicians is the least professionalized, the most open and the most susceptible to precisely the kind of charm, precisely the kind of seduction that somebody like Musk is clearly very accomplished at and has the resources, that, this truly immense wealth, more wealth than any person ever in history, I think, arguably. And so obviously Trump would be extremely susceptible to this kind of thing. And from Musk's point of view, not to put too fine a point on it, it is a remarkably successful strategy. I mean, you quoted figures for his current wealth. There are even higher numbers being bandied about currently that put his wealth in the $440 billion range. But as recently as the summer of 2023, right, his net worth was $130 billion. And the summer of 2024, it was $170 billion. And so the way in which financial markets, which have for a long time been sucked along by the vibe of Musk's businesses as much as anything else, If you think about all of the hype around Tesla, which for a long time now has been valued at higher levels than all of the other car manufacturers put together, and we're talking about mammoths like Toyota or VW, not like, Ford and GM, which are also RANDs at this point. So if you understand your business as a vibes-based business with certain things you really want to get done, then in a sense, I think the question is like, why hasn't anyone done this before? I mean, you could say no one is quite like Musk in terms of their personality and no one else has quite the resources. But there is an open question, I think, as to why the effort by the billionaire class, not maybe the single digit billionaire, but like multi-$10 billion folks, to suborn the American political system and exercise influence over it has not been larger and more ambitious in its scale earlier. Like, why is this only happening now? I mean, to obtain the status that Musk has with Trump, you have to have the Musk guy's persona and his wealth, but you contribute $250 million to the campaign and that makes you the largest donor. That's peanuts for him, right? That's chump change. You buy Twitter, you eliminate it as a threat to Trump, you allow it to, you to position the platform towards your interests. You do your very best. You throw your weight into the scale to try and get your guy elected. And once you succeed, hey presto, right? Your personal wealth accelerates on the gigantic scale because not unreasonably investors regard, Musk as in general, if you like, a beneficiary. He doesn't have to be concretely, or let alone engaged in any kind of malfeasance. There doesn't have to be any kind of suggestion of that or even conflict of interest. It's just that he's on the right side of history. And, with what from his point of view is a relatively trivial investment, he's demonstrated that fact and created facts on the ground. And that seems to me the core of the strategy here. I think, discussing minor points of conflict of interest and so on is kind of trivializing what's happened here, which is much more like the sort of alliance that we've seen in India, for instance, between Modi and Ambani and people like that, where there really is a symbiotic relationship between a business project and a political project going side by side and mutually reinforcing each other. And, what's remarkable, we discussed corruption and the Trump clan. And my point there was like, the scale is tiny, right? And with Musk, the scale isn't tiny anymore, let alone the technological ambition. We talked about SpaceX in an earlier program. Like, the scale of his vision and what they've done with Starlink and so on is staggering. And, he's just doing, in a sense, what you would expect a truly ambitious person with his resources to do.
Okay, so if we were to take this kind of materialist framework for understanding Musk's politics, I mean, how would that apply in an international sense? Because Musk has been intervening in politics abroad, specifically in supporting far-right politics in various European countries, Germany specifically, Britain as well. And this strikes me as curious, precisely because Musk is a capitalist whose various innovations would seem to depend on globalization for their business success. I mean, is there some benefit that's not immediately apparent to me then in supporting, an anti-EU AfD party in Germany, where Musk has major business interests in Germany, and exiting the EU would seem to kind of be a threat to those, or, I don't know, just generally in being sympathetic to Vladimir Putin, say, or could there be something else at work here? I mean, some principled prejudice, say, that's actually informing what's going on here, maybe something that traces back to Musk's own upbringing in apartheid South Africa, I guess is perhaps a relevant point here.
I mean, I think this South African connection is interesting, but I think it's a mistake and trivializing, really, to sort of draw the link from, apartheid racism to Musk's political positions now. Or to do these weird genealogies where the fact that I think his maternal grandfather was quite closely associated with various types of extreme right-wing politics, and that may be one of the reasons why he left Canada to move to South Africa, and then to deduce from that Musk position. I find all of that highly unconvincing. What I think, however, is interesting is to think about the way in which growing up in the truly protean environment of South African politics in the 70s and 80s might have shaped his understanding of the fungibility of the world, right? And of history and of constitutions. And, by all accounts, his dad, who he doesn't have a great relationship with, was opposed to apartheid and joined the Progressive Federal Party, but then left it because he had disagreements over one person, one vote, and whether or not black voters ought to be represented in the same parliament as white. So there was like no, he wasn't an out and out extreme racist. He was just somebody who had quibbles about those kind of things. And it isn't, I would suggest that Musk somehow carries the trace of apartheid with him, but at an absolutely essential element in his formation, he was in an open situation politically, right, where the future was very undetermined, and there were apocalyptic scenarios, and there were radical scenarios of radical change. And at the crucial moment, he actually left, in part to avoid conscription, presumably, and he used the option of taking Canadian citizenship to avoid that, which makes perfect sense. I mean, that's an incredibly sensible choice. I'm sure most of us would sympathize with that. But in a sense, a little bit like, a figure like Angela Merkel, perhaps, or many other people who went through the huge changes in Eastern Europe in the late 80s and the early 90s. It leaves you with this deep existential uncertainty about what the proper order of things should be. And for a while, you might go along with, liberal nostrums about, well, one best way, end of history, and so on. But if you're in the tech space that Musk has preeminently been in and moving in and out of that kind of scene, and around people like, some of his milieu, the PayPal milieu includes people like, Peter Thiel and so on, all of them have in common, who also has a South African connection, all of them have in common that they're willing to think the unacceptable, the normal about all sorts of things, right? And I think that it goes back to the first principles point. And in a sense, in a situation like that of late apartheid South Africa, what else do you do? You have to kind of recur to first principles. I think that basically animates his other political affiliations in the current moment, right? And I think part of it is when you see him in the conversation with Alice Weidel, it's just like Musk comes across as kind of naive, to be honest. He's kind of just messing around in politics. He presumably has had some, tough entanglements with German politics and German political economy with the factory that he's built outside Berlin. He quite likes the idea of disrupting Germany at this point, and Weidel, in fairness, like, I don't mean this like take this in inverted commas, but like the AfD, at least the Weidel part of the AfD, is really no more right wing than the GOP in the United States, right? Than the Republican Party in the United States. It's like if backing the incumbent party in the US is legitimate political activity, how can it be not legitimate to back the AfD? It just doesn't make any sense, right? So in his mind, and so he'll cross that, he'll transgress that boundary. As to the substantial fundamental conflicts that are involved on the one hand in running a global business with a huge stake in China, and on the other hand, being deeply involved with the American politics right now, but either of the Democrat or the Republican stripe. I mean, presumably his idea is you're in a mess anyway, and the more influence you have, the more you're at the table, the higher your chances of being able to sort things out. And you're going to count on the sheer weight of your presence in the way that, for instance, Apple was able to do in the first Trump administration. And, Musk has formidable contacts up and down the Chinese hierarchy, that somehow you're going to be able to square this circle. But sitting back and waiting for history to happen to you is a higher risk strategy than mucking in and trying to somehow manage this conflict. And that's presumably, I imagine, how he rationalizes this. It isn't programmatic. It's, well, what are my options here, and where is it that I might have most clout? And clearly he has more clout in the far right camp than he does in the, more mainstream professionalized policy circles.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here for now, but we will be back in a second to continue talking about Elon Musk. So I'd be curious then to take a look, or a closer look, at his, I guess would be his most explicitly political business venture, namely his ownership of Twitter, or X, the social media service. I'm curious, Adam, you're a prominent user of that service, or have been. I'm curious how your own experience of Twitter changed since Musk bought it. How do you still use it? Why do you still use it? And in terms of Musk's relationship to the business. I mean, do you think Musk is fully calculating about how he has shaped the service, changed its algorithm, or is he maybe himself a victim of the service's trolling style of free speech that he's championed there?
I mean, I think it's no doubt at all that it feeds his worst impulses. And, I actually have had a run-in with Musk himself on Twitter, in which he was for a while recommending my book, Wages of Destruction. And, I was gratified and actually sent him a appreciative tweet saying, thanks, Elon, only to discover that he was quoting Wages of Destruction in one of his vendettas against Justin Trudeau, who he was accusing of being a national socialist. And this was also then one of the themes in his conversation with Alice Weidel, that, the reason why neither of them are Nazis is that the Nazis were socialists and communists. And so clearly folks from the libertarian right have nothing to do with them. That's the kind of line. So, I think Musk, for him, it's an indulgence. For the rest of us, unfortunately, it was an essential utility, an essential platform, right? And that's the reason why not just me, but the vast majority of people in the media sphere are still on it, and why organizations continue to use it, which is that it has a residual value as being one of the most, complex and rich, decentralized networks we've ever seen. And I personally have, like a lot of other people, had a major investment in it, and I'm not willing to just to cash that in, but I don't use it in the same way that I used to, and for good reason. I had one really unfortunate run-in with the new algorithm over the winter, where I incautiously retweeted a really shitty piece of text tweet I should never have been in my feed. I've no idea why it was in my feed. That sort of thing didn't used to show up in my feed. So now I guess my interaction with it is I still read a lot and regularly, because it is an incredible source of, just of information and leads that you wouldn't otherwise come across. I still tweet to it, but I don't interact with it as much as I used to. It used to me to be a real kind of permanent online seminar every day, all day. And it unfortunately no longer feels like a safe space in which to do that kind of thing. So yes, it's been a real loss. And one of his other vendettas, the vendetta against Substack, which was one of his early victims, obviously affected me directly, because I have this newsletter, and everyone else, I think, in the newsletter world has also felt that disconnect, because in the early stages of Substack, the sweet spot was to have a big Twitter handle that you could then combine with the newsletter, and Musk sabotaged that. So it's been stressful. I mean, I'm a very online person, and Musk's intrusion into that world has been extremely disruptive.
Yeah, well then, this brings me, I guess, to my last question, because as you said yourself, Musk may be, influenced by the kind of discourse he's encouraged on Twitter in ways that are not entirely productive, even for himself. And the resulting views that he expresses are then sometimes, incoherent or mistaken. And I'm curious about the conclusions we can draw about that incoherence itself, that intellectual incoherence. I mean, should on some basic level we be surprised that the world's richest man kind of so conspicuously lacks what we would consider basic kind of moral intelligence, or basic grounding that we would think of as wisdom in a basic way? I mean, is there a contradiction in general terms in being this successful economically, in this productive in terms of entrepreneurship, and this, I don't know, the word that comes to mind sometimes is just dumb. I mean, like childish in terms of how he communicates and what he says and what he thinks. Is there a contradiction there at all in terms of those qualities?
I mean, to me, I think it just comes down to 2 points. One is his wealth. I mean, it's just unfathomable how wealthy he is, right? And the question is what do you do if you're that wealthy? And that's the burden of your question. And to me, then the second part of the answer just is a sort of banal sociology, right? He's a Gen X player who had a fragmented education, who grew up essentially in the computer scene. And so what do we expect? Like, you know, as you say, like there's a certain childishness in his taste. It's ill-formed. You know, there's nothing, he has, in a sense, kind of limited cultural resources. He's obviously very, very clever, and he obviously does read and is engaged with the world, but like there's not a lot of structure to his makeup and his social choices. Like he's hard to place in sociological terms. And he has this immense resource, and the world continues to give him more. And so, in a sense, then the question is, what do you do with that freedom and that resource, right? And the contrast, a very interesting contrast to somebody like Bill Gates, who's a baby boomer, you know, and was the first figure to really emerge from this tech scene as like this immensely personally wealthy person. And what does Gates do? It's so conformist, right? What he does is he joins the global public health agenda of the early 2000s. Doesn't just join it, but fundamentally shapes it. But it's a fundamentally conformist kind of idea of what goodness is, right? You're going to create global public goods, and you're going to display this at fora like Davos, and you're going to expect, as it were, the acclaim, and quite rightly deserve the acclaim of all well-meaning people of good faith, you know, in the world who are, you know, applauding. Except there's a lot of back skeptics and so on. But setting that aside, it's incredibly mainstream. And like somebody like Gates has an art collection. He likes classic American art. He has a Winslow Homer. He has an Andrew Wyeth. Like he though he has this immense wealth, he chooses, as it were, to place it in a very conformist kind of set of norms. And the radicalism of Musk is he, A, is even wealthier, and B, clearly thinks of himself also as somebody who should just disrupt comprehensively. So it isn't as though he's going to take his $500 billion of personal wealth and pour them into like conventional forms. He's going to disrupt and imagine, you know, new human civilizations on Mars, and then go about actually trying to make them real. And so I think that is part of the answer to your question, is like us looking at him and going, oh my God, he just doesn't conform. That's precisely the kind of a measure of his own success in his own terms, I think, of just resetting the boundaries. And for many, many people, of course, he's a figure of huge admiration. He's a little god. Like he's an extraordinary, powerful figure, not an object of scorn or contempt or judgment, but of just adulation. We're all going to the moon, right? In fact, we're not going to the moon, we're going to Mars. But like the Reddit Musk fans think of him as a prophet, if not the Messiah.
Okay, we're going to have to end the conversation here for now. But as always, we will be back in your feeds next week with a new data point or two. Ones and Tooze is written and edited by me, Cameron Abadi, along with Adam Tooze. It's produced by Claudia Tatey, Laura Rossbrow-Tellem, Rob Sachs, and Dan Efron. This show is made possible through the support of foreign policy readers. If you're interested in news and analysis from around the world, consider subscribing. Listeners to Ones and Tooze even get a 15% discount. Just go to foreignpolicy.com/subscribe and use the promo code TOOZE at checkout. That's TOOZE. And listeners, as always, we love getting your feedback. You can leave voice messages on the Ones and Tooze homepage on foreignpolicy.com, or email us, podcast@foreignpolicy.com, or you can tweet us. That's @OnesandTwozePod. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll be back in your feed next week.